People know me for my views on pleasure, and I want to discuss them today. In this video, I'm going to outline why pleasure is a problem and how you can approach pleasure and pain, and how I approach it myself, Let's get onto the video. I think it's important for me to discuss my philosophies on pleasure and pain, as both play a significant role in our lives. I discussed pleasure briefly in the video about self-moralism, right? And people didn't get it, but I'm going to explain my viewpoint now. You can form your own opinion. That's the entire point. I don't want you to look at my opinion and go like, he is 100% correct, okay? You're supposed to disagree. We're supposed to agree to disagree on some points, But basically, you have people who aim for 100% pain and wake up to go Goggins mode, okay? Wake up, grind, run, achieve, sleep. That isn't that bad, but it's kind of impossible to go 100% pain mode. But you also have those people who maximize as much pleasure, not because they're trying to, they are doing it because it feels good to them, right? Hook up with random women, satisfy the sweet tooth as much as possible, play video games as much as possible. That's what maximizing pleasure is. Now, pleasure can be good once in a while, but it depends on what pleasure is. And there are two different types of pleasure I'll explain later in this video, okay? And they do have different roles in your life. There are certain activities that you should outright avoid. Hookup culture is one of them. I think everyone should avoid hookup culture, straight up. It's not good for you in society. And you should avoid drugs like weed. And people say they do weed in moderation, but I disagree, because you're still getting yourself the symptoms of taking the drug, right? Because there are still symptoms that from, doing the activity once. So what am I getting here? What am I trying to say? My point is that every action gives an outcome, which is one of my philosophies, okay? Every action gives an outcome, a result. That result could be beneficial, right? Let's say you go to the gym. As a result from going to the gym and subjecting yourself of all that pain of working those muscles, your muscles get slightly bigger than yesterday. Or it could be a consequence, right? The result could be a consequence, such as eating McDonald's and feeling like garbage right afterwards, and you gain a little bit of fat. The outcomes of pain and pleasure is a life rule that everyone should understand. I highly suggest you research it, because it's a way to examine how you should go about life, in a sense. And not all pleasure is bad, okay? Like I said, there's two types of pleasure, okay? There's active pleasure and passive pleasure, which I'm going to explain now. Active pleasure is basically pleasurable activities where you're actually doing something, where you're getting yourself up to do the activity, like hobbies, for example. You've got guitar, researching history, learning theology, all this kind of stuff, Those, unless they're part of your purpose, because if you make it part of your purpose, then it can give you a bit of pain, because, anything that kind of becomes your purpose becomes a little bit burdensome, which purpose is a good thing, okay? But that's just what comes out of purpose, If you want to pursue purpose, you need to recognize that it's going to be you having to commit to it, essentially. Active pleasure is that, like just hobbies that you actually get up to do. Passive pleasure is hobbies that come out of desire. Well, they're not hobbies, they're just things that come out of desire. Activities such as hookup culture, drinking, weed, sex, video games. You think about it and it gets bigger and bigger in your mind, okay? That is passive pleasure. So not all pleasure is bad. Active pleasure is good. And you can also shift pain as you work into pleasure, because, if you pretty much see it as a passion, okay, which I think purpose is better than passion, because passion is definitely harder to get, because, we all have our individual callings, but you can shift pain into pleasure, which of course, that does have these problems. Like, you do have a part of your brain called the anterior mid-cortex, which gets bigger every time you do something you don't feel like doing, but that also provides you with much more, a lot of work, When you shift your work into pleasure, it creates something truly beautiful, which magnifies your results by 100. However, daily habits, such as eating poorly or partaking in degenerate hookup culture, is something we should work to avoid, right? Is bad. This principle is certainly a reflection of how I used to live my life, okay, compared to now. Back then, when I was 15 years old, I would wake up, waste my seed, give in to every single pleasurable bad habit, play video games all day with my arched back, and I was skinny. Okay, I was very skinny. As a result, I was stacking up so much consequences every single day, which compounded into my life being absolute garbage. Think about that. Every single action you take, there's a consequence, and it stacks up every time you do it. And thus, it results in your life being garbage. Now, fast forward to 2024. I wake up, I go out into the sun to get some vitamin D, as well as to wake up my eyes. I go back inside, work, cold shower, work, breakfast. I do a little meditation and all that in the middle of the day. And this all stacks up to give me benefits, okay, to benefit my life. Basically, you stack these things up and the results compound, okay? So I understand fully that your actions determine your future, right? Which is why I think pleasure is bad. You need to do the proper actions to get a good future. I've been through the bad habit pipeline, and now I'm out of it and I'm into an actual decent life. Of course, I want it to be better because I have things I want to do, right? But that's a story for another time. I want you to look at your life and examine whether you are progressing or regressing due to your habits, right? Now let's discuss whether it is possible to fully escape pleasure and to live a life full of action, right? Is it possible to be completely perfect and not do pleasure at all? 100%. No, it is not. Because this is how our brains work, right? Those bad habits, some of it is our default, right? Of course, weed and pornography aren't your defaults. Okay, they're just habits you can eliminate. But let's say you're doing cold showers every single day, right? You're going to miss out on some days because your brain isn't built to do that consistently. And thus, there'll be one day where you sit there and do nothing. So it's impossible to have a life full of just pain. Your brain will have to relax for a bit, as burnout does exist, you know? And there are different ways to approach burnout, and I think you should approach it properly, but that's basically how it works, you know? It is possible, however, to eliminate certain habits. Like how I said, habits like weed and pornography don't stay forever unless you allow it to. You can take action and get rid of those habits or those addictions, you know? I stopped gaming in 2024 at the start of this year. Uninstalled everything, gone. Before then, I gamed very little, but now, gone. And I also stopped eating so much sugar. And you can do it too. It is very possible. Understand your triggers and find a way to eliminate them. If you get lustful every morning, practice capturing every thought and keeping those lustful thoughts away. Like how this is basically a Christian practice, but you can be doing it like, okay, this is a Christian practice, but you can do it as an atheist, as it still works because you know you're controlling your thoughts. Capture every lustful thoughts in Jesus' name, which you would be doing it in science's name. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for that joke. That was not funny. but just capture the thoughts and don't think about it. Okay, this does come from meditation. You meditate more, then once the lustful thought comes, go away. Or think of something else. Don't think much of the thought afterwards. You can do the same with chocolate. If you get a trigger from chocolate, just gone. Go away, you know? And pain isn't always easy to keep in tune with, okay? Your brain will get exhausted, like I said before, and you need to recognize that fact. I fall out of rotation all the time. I usually have 10 to 12 hour work days, but then sometimes, I'm just not working for an entire day. It's burnout, you know? So now what about pain? Does it have its limits? Pain should come from action, right? And action is done for a result. And if pain is pursued for self-hatred, such as, you know, you're kind of self-harming in a sense, that should be avoided because you're not doing it for like a reason, for like, you know, a benefit, because there's no benefit to self-harming. There is none. You could be doing it as an experiment. That's fine. You know, you're doing a psychological experiment, but no, it's not a good thing to do because there's no benefit that comes out of it. It's just a horrid outcome that makes you feel worse, right? The pain you're pursuing should have an outcome that is good, and it should be for an action, right? Like going to the gym, cold showers, all of those are painful, but you do it anyway for an outcome. It's an act of discipline, essentially. So I'll bring this back to the video's title, okay? Why is pleasure bad? As I just explained, pleasure and pain. Because pleasure doesn't breed a good outcome, right? You could say the hobbies are pleasurable since they are enjoyable, but the hobby itself is what makes it pleasurable or not. If your hobby is addictive, right? Like your hobby's video games, then yes, it's a pleasurable activity and you should remove it. Well, if your hobby builds up a skill, it is more of a practice activity than anything. This leads to active pleasure and passive pleasure, which I just discussed before. So every single pleasurable activity comes with a consequence, which is my main argument. Because people like to picture pleasure and pain like this. Pleasure, eating a cake. Okay. Pain, running up a hill with a ball and chain on your foot. That's what people picture it as. But pain isn't just suffering. It is suffering in the meantime, but the result afterward feels great. While with pleasure, you're doing something right now, dopamine spike, oh, I feel garbage right now. It's all about the long term. And with pleasure, you can become a slave to the pleasure. Pain is not the same. Pain is different. You can't become a slave of pain. And some people might argue, what about workaholics? That's a thought pattern in their mind. That can be eliminated easily. They can disassociate themselves with the purpose and stop being workaholic, but workaholic does actually give some benefits, you know? And I'm not opposed to workaholicism at all. I might actually be a workaholic myself. I don't even know. But you can't be a slave to pain. It's impossible. But you can be a slave to pleasure in a sense, okay? You can wake up and you immediately have a desire to lust. You immediately have a desire to gluttony. You immediately have a desire to do all this kind of stuff, okay? And that is bad for you, because that means you're gonna stack up the consequences now as a result. And you can tell when you're a slave of a pleasurable activity when it becomes addictive, right? You know, and that's probably why people say do it in moderation, bro, but that still makes you a slave of it because you're desiring to do it in moderation anyway. So don't let it manifest in your mind like a parasite. You want to have control over your pleasures. You know, if you do some pleasurable activities, like I'm fine if you, I don't know, every Sunday you eat a cake, you know, but I wouldn't be doing that. Don't get me wrong, sometimes a pleasurable activity such as eating something rather sweet is a good way to relax, but it does depend on the activity itself. If you relax by playing video games, you're still giving yourself the negative connotations of, you know, dopamine and all that from the video games, okay? And if you're using that pleasurable activity as a coping mechanism to avoid your purpose as well, then that's bad. So what should the ideal life be like? 80% pain, 20% pleasure. Of course, you can maximize the pain in certain days, like tomorrow I'm gonna go 95% pain, but this is the idea. You want 80% pain because that is where you build and create. 80% of the day, 80% of the month, you build and create. While 20% you use to reset your brain for a bit. And this isn't balance, okay? Balance is different. Balance is where you avoid doing work because, you know, it's all about balance, guys. No. This is about going hard and then Sunday hits, going soft. That's the life you should stick to. 80% pain, 20% pleasure. This way you can start actually, you know, blessing your life truly. And when you dedicate your life to building something, then that will compound into a greater life in your time. That is why pleasure is not necessarily a fully bad thing, but it can lead to horrible aspects of your life, right? It can lead to horrible things. Okay, so don't do too much pleasure, minimize it. Keep never quitting.